My name is Clay Williams, and this is People Talks, presented by Canal Pursuit Productions. The idea behind People Talks is that everyone has a story, and everyone's story has value. People Talks is a mixture of people with lived experience and people who work in health and fitness fields, one speaker each week. This week's speaker is Deborah Moskow. Deb was born and grew up in Kitchener-Waterloo and has recently moved to Chatham to a slower life pace with her husband, 2 cats, and dog. In that order, right?
Yeah.
She has 2 adult sons, the eldest living in a group home where he gets lots of support for his developmental and physical challenges. Deb is an avid runner and focuses on wellness, both at home and at work. She loves the practice of cognitive behavioral therapy and hypnotherapy, as it brings such wonderful results for people who want to change their thinking and habits and take control of their lives and future. Her first career was in law enforcement, and so she has an understanding of the criminal justice system. After graduating with her Master of Social Work degree from Wilfrid Laurier in 1996, Deb concentrated on working in the field of mental health, both in community and hospital settings. She's been practicing CBT since 2005 part-time and since 2010 full-time. She became interested in hypnotherapy as an adjunct to the cognitive behavioral therapy in 2011, and very soon started to seeing quicker results as to when clients were reporting that they were feeling better with the combination of CBT and hypnotherapy. Deb, welcome to People Talks.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad we were able to finally connect. We will be airing your segment in late June, and I can probably edit that out. Anyway, sorry. Welcome to People Talks.
Thank you.
So can you tell us who you are and how you got here? Share some of your story.
Sure. I kind of grew up with a really sheltered life. So I grew up in Waterloo, and I was, the second of 4 children in a lower middle class family. So my mom didn't work, my dad did, and my dad was Eastern European, so quite strict. We kind of weren't allowed to leave the neighborhood, and there was a lot of stuff that happened there in terms of discipline and so forth. But basically, I lived a sheltered life, and then what happened was I had my child, and he had a stroke when he was like 2 weeks old, and none of us had ever been exposed to anything other than health and wellness and typical type living. So it kind of changed things around for me. And at the time, I had actually gone to school, to college, Fanshawe College, after school, and gotten my law and security administration and tried to be a police officer. So that was one of my first exposures, because that was late 70s. And everywhere I went, they kind of said, we've just hired our first group of women, and we're going to see how it works out before we hire any more. So big discrimination, but I got into retail security, loved it for a lot of years, and ended up working for Eaton's for about 15 years. And we all know what happened to Eaton's. They kind of went under. So I was restructured out and needed to figure things out. At that point, my son was, I forget how old he was. He was maybe 6 or 7. And what we experienced with him was, I was single for a lot of that time. So it was sort of on my own, dealing with this child who had like 10 surgeries by the time he was 8 years old. And, lots of doctors, lots of physio, lots of medical personnel, and a whole different world for me. So that was sort of the start. And then I got engineered out of my job. decided to return to school. And that's when I went for social work because it just seemed to fit in with a lot of what I was doing. I was involved in community committees at that time, and yeah, so I went from a really active job where I was walking and moving all the time. I was a good weight. I was smoking at the time. I quit smoking in 1989, put on a little bit of weight, took it off. But then when I finished work and wasn't active anymore, and I went to school and became sedentary, I all of a sudden started putting the weight on. A lot of what I did with my son, I ended up with a lot of chronic pain, and it was quite a struggle for me at that time to kind of move through things. I had been a jock in school, so I was all Ontario gymnastics, I jazz danced, I did all that sort of stuff until my son came along, and then it just unraveled, and all I could do was take care of him. So that's kind of that story. And so finished school, got some jobs. He ended up going into a group home when he was 17 because it was just too much for us to handle. By that time, I was already with my now husband, Dave, who also, I'd say he was a running partner, but not for me, for other people, because I'm not quite fast enough for him. But anyway, that's kind of when I got into mental health. I worked for Canadian Mental Health Association for a number of years, and my picture's gone.
Yep, I lost it.
Yeah. Just let me see what I can do here. Not sure what happened there. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries, you're back.
Okay. So started working when I graduated with my master's of social work. I started working at Canadian Mental Health Association and worked in the criminal justice system. So I actually designed the program that diverted people from the criminal justice system to the mental health system so that they could get the support that they needed. And that sort of later morphed into mental health court and dealing with people with mental health issues in the justice system in a different way. So anyway, from there, I went to the former London Psychiatric Hospital, worked with a community team, and then was a co-leader for a short time, and then came back and worked for Grand River Hospital and did in the mental health and addiction. So I've really worked in mental health for my pretty much my entire career. It just was something that I fell into, and it was very appropriate because my sister dealt with, she passed away in the fall, but she dealt with major depression, anxiety, and when she talked about it, then my mom told her that she had dealt with depression, anxiety as well, but don't tell anyone. So my sister, being my sister, told us all, and then we understood a lot of things more than we understood before, and we're able to kind of look at things differently, deal with things differently. Anyway, so I did spend a lot of my career in mental health, and I learned cognitive behavioral therapy fairly early in the game. It's something that was developed in and about 1963. Right now, it's sort of the golden standard for mental health, especially when you're looking at things like anxiety, depression, personality issues, those sorts of things. There's cognitive behavioral therapy, and then an offshoot of that is DBT, or dialectical behavior therapy. So those are just two of the things that I've trained under a lot of different theories around that and done that. So in 2001, because I was so overweight and in pain and needed to fitness, get more fit, I decided to join Runner's Choice in Waterloo. Their start running group, and it was ridiculous because we would go 3 kilometers right at the beginning, and I would walk most of it because I was in so much pain. It took me about 3 times to get through it, and then I loved it. I pushed myself through the pain and the frustration, because I'd been a jock. So, if you're going to do something that's athletic, you're going to be good at it. And I was not. I was persistent, but I wasn't very fast. I wasn't, I walked a lot and that sort of thing in the beginning. Really got into it was through Running Room then. I taught, I instructed the 5K group. My husband and I did it together. We did the 5K group. I had said to him, I'm going to start this Let's Start Running group. If you want to join me, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine. I'm going to do it anyway. So he joined and very quickly went to the front of the group, and I was at the back, and he had been a runner years before, and he was much more fit than I was. Anyway, so we actually co-led the 5K group for many, many years and kind of started people out there until he decided that he wanted to run longer distances, and I wasn't quite there yet. But then in about 2009, I left that group to train for a half marathon, and that was sort of my first longer distance. I did the Waterloo Marathon and just fell in love with it. Right, that was a pretty good year. And then I kept training, and it was 2010 then. So I guess it was maybe the next year, there was a group that was going to New York to do the marathon. And so I said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And little did I know how hard it would be. But I did it. I wasn't last in the group, so that was a real accomplishment for me. But it did take me, 7 hours. My marathons are about 7 hours long. That's about my speed. It's not 6.5 to 7 hours is where I go with it. But you know what? I do it and I enjoy it, and it's a wonderful experience. So I also did the Goofy Challenge a couple times. The first time I wasn't able to complete it. I was off pace by like 3 minutes. And that was because I had trained with friends, and then they left me at 8K because they wanted to go faster, and I had a certain pace. So I hadn't prepared myself mentally to do it. And we all know that things like running are so strongly related to your mental thinking. And that's where the CBT comes in as well. Anyway, I went back 2 years later and completed it with, bells on, so to speak. And then that was my last marathon. So what I do, cognitive behavior, I'll just sort of tell you a little bit about cognitive behavioral therapy, and then I'll mix the other stuff in. So cognitive behavioral therapy is where we look at the thoughts, the behaviors, and the emotions, and how they all tie together. We know from brain research that every emotion, every behavior is preceded by a thought or a group of thoughts. So that's what we kind of work on. We also work on lifestyle changes. So when you're dealing with depression, the best single way to get yourself out of a depression is to activate your life. And then the best single way to keep from what word am I looking for? Relapsing is to change your thinking about how you're looking at things. So cognitive behavioral therapy has the same efficacy as medication. So medication has an effectiveness of about 60%. and so does cognitive behavioral therapy. The medication tends to depend on the interaction between the chemicals in your body and the medication. And we also know that we do create a tolerance to it. So over time, it often has to be changed up and that sort of thing. I'm not anti-medication, so don't think that I am. I think that there's definitely lots of places for medication and lots of uses for it. And as a matter of fact, my sister, she had implanted a deep brain stimulator. Her depression was so profound, and that helped her out. So I'm always looking at what are the tools, but what are the least intrusive tools? So that would be your cognitive behavioral therapy and hypnotherapy. So one of the things about hypnotherapy is that hypnotherapy works on your subconscious mind. So the state of hypnosis is a brainwave state. So actually it's two, your theta and your beta. Theta is your deeper state. And when we're in that state, either because we're relaxed, and we go into it every day at least twice. So we pass through our state of hypnosis as we're going to sleep and as we're waking up. So it's sort of that state that's between awake and asleep, or asleep and awake. So those are natural, but it also comes when we have an overload of messages. So if there's too much going on, maybe overstimulation, that sort of thing, we go into a state of hypnosis. You may notice, or you may remember times maybe where you've driven home from somewhere and you got home and you go, oh, geez, how did that happen? I don't remember the drive. And generally you probably had an overload of messages because of traffic or whatever was going on. And you were in a state of hypnosis and, but in full control. So people think that when they're in a state of hypnosis, they don't have control. But what it is our subconscious mind is more susceptible to things that it hears, feels, smells, senses, any of the senses. And it's quicker to react to it. You get a much better reaction from it. So I use that because one of the things that I do with people with the CBT is help them change the way that they think, because that's really important. When someone's in a state of depression or anxiety, and I'll talk about those two in particular because they are the most common. Depression is when we're thinking about the past and generally some of the things that have happened in the past that haven't been that wonderful. Anxiety is when we're thinking about the future and when we are thinking about distressing things that might happen in the future. And so it involves negative thinking for both of those. And so then we look at how can you change it, not to just positive, because that wouldn't always be rational. So, if somebody dies, for example, it's not really rational to think in a positive way about that, but it is rational to think in a neutral way. So I also add, with the CBT that I teach, we add neutral to it so that you can do both. So it's one of the things that people don't always realize, for example, about anxiety is when your brain interprets something as a life or death situation. So it thinks that it's going to die, that you're going to die. So it puts your body into what's called fight or flight response and diverts the blood from your major organs to your big muscles, your arms and your legs, gets your heart racing faster. Your brain kind of goes a mile a minute trying to problem solve. And the thing about that is you're probably not in physical danger when you get anxious. We never want to lose anxiety because if a coyote's chasing us down the trail, we want to be able to run for have everything automatically run for our lives, right? And so we want to have anxiety. problem is it's like a smoke detector. Like smoke detectors don't always go off when there's a fire or smoke. They go off at a number of different times. And so we evaluate the situation, either call 911, put out the fire, or turn the smoke detector off. And that's what CBT does, is it helps people to learn how to turn that faulty thinking in the brain off and think something different. And the way we do that is we create new thoughts. So a number of people who do the cognitive behavioral therapy, the CBT, they teach you just to react to thoughts that as they come up, and change your thoughts. You may have heard that, you know, if you're thinking in a bad way and you're feeling in a way that you don't want to feel, then you want to change those thoughts up. But what our teachings does is kind of looks at people circumventing it. So if you know that you're going to have a situation where you feel anxious, and all these things often repeat themselves just in different situations. So if you know you're going to be anxious, you know you're going to be depressed about certain situations, then you start to create a dialogue, like a self-dialogue. I would call it a script, something that starts to change the way your brain is reacting to whatever it's hearing. Our brain is very interesting because, and this is another thing that's kind of interesting, is so our left brain understands words. And if our left brain understands a word and can put it into a picture, then it flips it over to the right brain, where the right brain forms the picture. Everything that we do is operationalized by the pictures that are created in our right brain. And so whatever we visualize, whatever we picture and imagine, whatever we think about, our brain and body kind of follows with that. I'll give you an example. When I used to run trails, it was the joke because I would fall all the time. I'd always trip, right? And I'd come out dirty, and it was kind of, you know, not wonderful. And so I actually quit running for a while, quit running trails, because I did hurt myself at one point. I think I bruised or cracked some ribs, and I was out I couldn't run for about 5 weeks. It was so sore. So I thought, yeah, okay, I'll take a break. And then in the meantime, I'd learned this new way of thinking in terms of how the brain, and I'd heard it before, but it didn't sort of resonate. You know how you have to hear things, you know, 5 or 6 times before it's actually in your brain enough that you can understand it or repeat it or whatever. Anyway, in this case, we were doing a practice run out at Sulphur Springs, and it's a 20K loop. Excuse me, and it's very technical. So lots of roots, lots of rocks, lots of hills, all those sorts of things. And I would always fall. And that, again, that was the big joke. This time I went out and I was running along and I was going, oh, don't trip, don't trip, don't trip. And then it was like a light went off in my head and I went, oh, geez, Deb, there you are going on with don't trip. And you know that your brain can't picture you not tripping. So what it does is it pictures you tripping. Mm-hmm. So then I changed I intentionally changed my talk to, you know, you're running beautifully, you're missing the roots, you've got great balance, you're managing the rocks really well, blah, blah, blah. So I went on the whole thing. So I came out and all my friends were waiting for me because I'm always last. So they unfortunately have to wait for me. And I came out and some of them said, hey, Deb, you're like clean. Does that mean that you didn't fall? And I'm going, yeah, I didn't. This is like the first time in years that I did a trail run. And it was all because I truly believe it was all because I changed my dialogue so that my brain could work with my body. That's another reason why the hypnotherapy is good. Because when I do hypnotherapy with athletes, I have them in that state of hypnosis go through, whether it's a dance routine or, a diver or a runner or a golfer, I have them go through their routines or everything in their head in perfect form. We know through some research that's been done in neuroplasticity that the brain can do phenomenal things with the body, and one of the things is there was a study done, and I can't recall the exact details of it, but I'm going to just sort of gloss over it a bit. But it was a group of people that wanted to improve their lean muscle mass. So one group went to the gym and did a routine for 20 minutes a day, every day. And then the other one visualized doing it for 20 minutes a day, every day. So it wasn't that they just visualized exercising. They visualized the specific routine that the other people did. And believe it or not, at the end of that experiment, there was no significant difference between the changes in the improvement in the lean muscle mass, which just blows me away. So it just kind of tells you how powerful the brain is. And I could see it over and over again when I work with people, particularly when I add that hypnosis to it. I don't generally do hypnosis without doing the conscious CBT, because then people kind of understand what's going on. So that's the other part of cognitive behavioral therapy is those lifestyle changes that include healthy eating, good sleep, relaxation or meditation, being in the moment. And that is kind of there where if you're in the past, you tend to be, feeling more depressed. When you're in the future, you tend to be feeling more anxious. But when you're right in the moment, right in the present, then you're just doing, and you're not experiencing that. The other thing that goes along is running. So it's not just running anymore. The research that had been done up until just recently was around running, but I think that they didn't have ways, the same as the brain research is so new, and that's because they didn't have ways to sort of be able to measure the brain and activity until they got PET scans and MRIs and things like that they can really use for studying. But what they studied was more a routine that involved running. And there's a book called Spark, and it talks about that particular, some of the things that the running helps with, and it's things like ADD, anxiety, depression, hormonal issues, aging. Like, it's just incredible how important movement, for sure, but particularly running. And it doesn't have to be fast running. It can be walking as well. But that sort of routine, that regime of walking quickly and or running, and that's because that really works towards releasing the endorphins and the oxytocin, norepinephrine, and there's a lot, all the neurotransmitters that are important for what we're doing. We do need to be careful when we run, though, because the endorphins are actually painkillers. So that's one of the reasons why people can get injured when they're running, because they actually don't always notice when they're overdoing because of the analgesic effect of running. So I'm a big proponent of doing these things, but I'm also a big proponent of changing things slowly. So making tiny changes, not going out there and doing too much too fast in a way that it's not going to last. So our thoughts and our behaviors are all habits. They become habits because we've practiced them so many times that we get really good at it, even if we don't want to get good at it, like being anxious or depressed. And so that's where the secret weapon to change that up is to come up with different thoughts and practice those enough that they become the strongest in your brain. This is what the newest brain research is starting to show, which is really, really powerful because it means that if we have the knowledge, we can build the skill to intentionally live our life the way that we want to and become resilient. Because we all have things that happen in our life that are bad, good, neutral. When we focus more on the negative things, then we're pretty negative. And we actually don't even tend to notice those things that are positive or neutral. So
that's interesting. I think it's an interesting approach. So honestly, this is the first time I've heard about cognitive behavior therapy as named as such, right? So okay. I know that my oldest sister struggles with depression. And when she starts, and she has for quite a long time, so when she starts to feel herself entering the zone, so entering a time that often leads into a downward spiral, she recognizes that now. She's a little older than I am, but through years and years of going into those spirals again and again and again, she recognizes the front door of those, and is able to know where it's going to lead her. So she puts on her shoes and goes out for a walk, and it has a huge effect, right?
It does.
And I think it's awesome that there's now a method where we can teach people to recognize that in their 20s and late teens, instead of after so many struggles and so many downward spirals and all of those, and just age and experience teaching them. How awesome is it that we can hand people a tool to do that early on, right?
Exactly. And I really think that, like, my personal opinion is this needs to be in the schools. So it's kind of interesting whenever I have teachers that I teach, I encourage them to pass the information on to their students. Not in a way that reveals that they've, had it for, but if they can find some way to pass it on to their students, then their students are going to learn a little bit earlier some of the things. There's a fellow by the name of BJ Fogg, and he talks about tiny habits. He's a behavioral psychologist down in the States, and he talks about tiny habits and making these tiny changes. And it's interesting because one of the things that he says is that if you want to change your outlook and the way that your day goes, if you, when you put your feet on the floor, if you say, it's going to be a great day, or I'm awesome, then through repetition and doing that, then you end up feeling better about your day overall. So I had a kindergarten teacher that I was working with once, quite a few years ago, and she said, you know what, I'm going to do this with my students. So she put a picture of a sun on the door, and when the kids lined up to come in every day, she had them touch the sun and say, it's going to be a great day.
Mhm.
And that makes me feel really good, because I know that then younger kids are going to be much more helpful,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
are going to feel better, learn it a little bit earlier. But
Mhm.
the whole movement thing is crucial. Movement for physical health, movement for mental health, all those sorts of things. And I think one of the difficulties, I noticed it when I became sedentary and just was doing the brain stuff. I have to really push myself to get up and move, and that sort of thing. And we know that, well, for example, I had breast cancer in 2018, and they say that 30 minutes of moderate exercise 5 times a week reduces your chances of recurrence by 50%,
Wow.
40 to 50%. It's amazing, and that movement, and you don't want to just do an hour and a half and then stop.
Mhm.
You want to, you want to do your 30 minutes, and then you want to, or you maybe do 3 10 minutes, but you want to make sure that you're moving throughout the day,
Mhm.
that you're not just, doing it once and then sitting down. Your sister getting up for a walk, for example, is activating her day. She's getting everything moving, and she's doing something, and it's getting all the chemicals going that are going to fight off that depression.
Yep. Yep. And it gets the metabolism up a little bit, and that metabolism's kind of like a flywheel, right? After the
Yeah,
exercise is done, it stays up for a little while and
it does.
slowly cools down.
Yeah.
Yeah, running. I started running in 2004, late 2003, early 2004. And just before starting to run, I was diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis, so fingers and toes.
Ouch.
And
Yeah.
my fingers are a little bit crooked already, but um, it was at that time, it was so bad that I couldn't bend my fingers enough to hold onto a broom handle, that my
Oh
range of
dear.
motion was so reduced.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started running, it wasn't a goal to fight arthritis pain. I just didn't like it that when I got to the top of a flight of stairs, I was winded. So just
Mm-hmm.
wanted to get better. But I found after about 6 months of running almost every day, probably 5 times a week, I would run a couple miles.
Yeah.
I had almost full range of motion back in my hands,
Mm-hmm.
and 80% of my arthritis pain was gone.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't use my hands much to run, so it's all of the, as you were talking about, the chemicals that are activated, the increased blood flow, the increased oxygen in the system, everything it's just good for you. But
Yep.
those first few runs around the industrial complex were
Aren't they
definitely a
awful?
struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was what I did too. And I started running when I was um, probably about 45 as well. So very similar story.
Hmm.
I'm 65 now, so a little bit older. And again, I've kind of gone to walking more because since the breast cancer, I've had some health issues that have come up since
Hmm.
that are related, and so it's hard for me to get out and run, but I can get out and walk, and
Hmm.
I actually my friends would laugh at me because, well, they wouldn't laugh at me, but they encouraged me to walk because I'm a very fast walker. I actually came sixth in a walking race
Nice.
once, and my fastest walking time is 7 minutes slower than my fastest running time for a 5K race.
Hmm.
So that tells you how slow I run and how fast I walk.
That's a good power walk for sure.
It is. So I've gotten back into that. I'd like to get back into it. I
Mhm.
really would like to get back into running, and I'm sure I will.
Mhm.
But right now, I've kind of just moved into the walking category for the moment.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of, excuse me, a lot of weighted pack hiking this past year.
Okay.
I've got a
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
friend who was training for mountain climbing. She's
Yes.
actually in quarantine on her trip back from climbing Denali. She just got up to the
Oh,
peak of
how
Denali.
wonderful.
So
Yeah.
I was kind of her training partner, and the weighted pack hiking really helped my running pace.
I bet. Yeah.
We would go up and down the, well, you know, Chicopee ski hill, right? So we
Yes.
would do laps up and down the ski hill. I would carry, I weigh maybe 200 pounds, so I would carry a 50-pound pack.
Hmm.
She would carry a 65-pound pack, which is about half her body weight. So she's a powerhouse. I was just there to keep her company. I had a hard
Right.
time keeping up, but
Yeah.
definitely the weighted pack was. It didn't seem like a lot of extra exertion, but after 5 kilometers with the heavier pack on, you definitely feel it in your legs, and there's not as much. You know, running involves a lot of core. There's all the bouncing around, stomach issues,
Yeah.
and all of that stuff, right? So anyway, just a thought.
For sure.
Yeah.
Now, just in talking briefly about COVID has really kind of put a wrench in things for a lot of people, because a lot of people were able to keep up with their running or their walking because they would do it in groups. And so that group accountability, and that's what I did. I mean, I taught or instructed courses so that I had that accountability to be able to go out and, people were depending on me and they were waiting for me and so forth. And now I know some people still do it, like they have little bubbles, but it's harder for me. So when I work with people, and there's two different types of people, like it's interesting because there's people that are really struggling with COVID, and then there are people that are maybe not so much struggling. And what I find is people who are a little bit more introverted tend to be quite comfortable, or people who are depressed tend to be quite comfortable staying on their own, because part of depression is self-isolating anyway. And so when I try to get people up and out, so people who are, I'll finish that thought. People who are extroverted and really get their energy from other people are the ones that I find are struggling a lot more, right? I also find that when I work with people, and a lot of the work I do right now is helping people who are on a disability, either long-term or short-term, to get back to work, because work is so important, because it gives us schedules, it gives us routine, it gives us structure, which is all really, really important for our mental health. But one of the things with COVID is it's hard to tell people to get out and do things. Mm-hmm. Right? Because they can maybe go out and walk in their street, or but they can't get together with people and do it with people. So it makes it a little bit more difficult. And that makes my job a little bit more difficult, because I have to find a lot of ingenious ways to get people moving and scheduling and doing different things. So
yeah, without that extra help of the accountability of being in a group, right?
Yes. Because that's one of the beauties about running, is being in a group. The other is races. If people get involved in races, which we do, although we haven't, because we don't do the virtual race. We did a virtual race, and it was sort of disappointing.
You and I are on the same page there.
Yeah. So, but there are a couple of virtual races that are coming up, only because they got deferred from last year, and I don't think I can defer one of them anymore. But some of them are trying to do it in real life, and I did join a team just recently around the Big Canada Run, I think it's called. So we have a team of women who are collectively doing 10,000 kilometers, and it all kind of goes into the collection. And so I'm going to try that. And I have a friend that's going to do it with me. So here in Chatham, because I don't have the benefit of all my Kitchener-Waterloo friends that I used to. I really miss them. Actually, it's kind of interesting, because we moved here in October and COVID hit in February. We had a planned get together in January, but there was a where we came back to town, but there was such a bad snowstorm we couldn't get together because we had to get back home. Otherwise, we would have been stuck in Waterloo for days. And but then COVID hit, and it's been almost 2 years since. I mean, I've seen a couple friends, when there was openings in between, but mostly we've really disconnected from our world that we had prior. So it's kind of it's hit people in different ways, but it's hit people in some pretty serious ways.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, we've been okay because I do the cognitive behavioral therapy. I set an example for my husband. He actually used to be quite negative, and now he's probably more positive than me half the time. So I kind of set it by example with him for the most part.
One of the things you mentioned is brain power, and not those words. That's what I wrote down. So
Okay.
it's amazing the power that our brain has, and you were talking about the value of visualization. I kind of discovered that probably in the mid 1980s, and it sounds really lame, but a set of cassette tapes to better to improve my golf swing.
Yeah.
And it was almost exactly what you were talking about. Visualize the perfect form of your sport in your head over and over again, and your brain remembers what your body feels like doing that. And I kept remnants of that through my running, let's say, career through the years, but that especially in the longer runs. As you mentioned, the marathon distance is really hard, and there's a lot of.
And you got to do a lot of self-talk, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Your brain's got to take over because your body says, "Curl up beside that tree," right?
Yeah. Go lay down.
So some of those. One of the tools I used is always visualizing the finish line. I have to know what the finish line looks like, and whether it's dark or lit by a fire or whatever, I know what the finish line looks like, and that's my one of my tools, I guess. I have this vision, or this, I know what it feels like to cross the finish line. I'll be exhausted and in pain and all of that stuff, but I'm going to cross the finish line. This is what it looks like. So that's what I'm looking forward to as I'm struggling up the next hill, right?
So you want to visualize yourself crossing the finish line with lots of energy and sort of running through. So when I'm doing a longer race and my energy level wanes appropriately towards the end, depending on the length of the race. Like I can get really tired after a 5K race at about 4K, or 8K for a 10K and so on. So what I'll often do is when I'm running and I notice that I'm kind of dragging along and not feeling great, I will actually say to myself, "Oh my gosh, you feel like you're floating. You're so light as a feather. You're floating. Your feet barely touch the ground as you hit." And I can feel a wave come up from my toes right up to my head. And I become sort of floating as long as I think that. And then I, of course, stop thinking it and go back to the other. But it's just something that I often challenge people to try to do something like that.
Yeah, for sure. The last week's speaker was Sophia Leah. I'm not sure if you've heard of her. She's a young high school student in Edmonton who started an online magazine for youth mental health, and within a couple of months had hundreds of thousands of followers worldwide.
Oh, wow.
But one of the parts of her story is when she was in her early teens, all the way through her childhood and into her early teens, she was always sick in the wintertime. She would always get something in the wintertime and be sick every winter. Until this one year, she thought, heard about a good positive attitude. I'm going to have a positive attitude. I'm not going to get sick this year. I'm going to feel great. I'm a winner. All of the lame 90s cassette tape stuff, right?
Yeah.
That is so powerful. And after a couple of years, she kind of looked back at herself and thought, you know what? I haven't been sick the last couple of years. A change of attitude can make such an amazing difference, right?
So it's interesting that you talk about the lame 90s cassette tape stuff, because it was, right? It was pretty.
There was certainly a stigma, right?
Yeah, and the other thing is that they started doing it without any research. But the research has caught up.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing. It was always evidence-based, so you knew that there were results from it. They knew there were results, but they didn't know why. Now they're starting with the brain research. Again, neuroplasticity, any of that sort of stuff. They're really starting to understand a bit more of why. And the other thing that I wanted to say, I was talking about like races and that sort of thing, and it's great to have goals to work towards, but the other thing that I caution people about is there's so much emphasis put on goals. And there's a fellow by the name of James Clear who's written a book called Atomic Habits. It's a great book. And he talks about when you focus too much on a goal, you are in danger of not reaching it. But when you focus on this, what he calls the system, I call it a process, then you're going to actually reach that goal. So you want to have a goal, but how many times do you, or how many people do you know that have a goal, let's say for weight loss or for getting a certain speed or whatever, and they don't reach it within the time that they think that they should. And so then they get discouraged, they get upset, they maybe try something else, or they maybe change their goal. Whereas if you have that goal, it gives you a direction of where to go. And it's really the process. How are you going to get there? That is the important part to focus on. Because things don't happen quickly. And if you make those small changes and you stick with them, then you reach this certain threshold. You may not see any change. You may not feel any difference. You may not lose any weight, but then all of a sudden you reach a certain point, you get to this threshold and it starts happening. But if you give up before that threshold, then that's going to be very discouraging, and it's going to put you in a place where you jeopardize meeting your goal.
Right. Yeah, the old adage says a goal without a plan is just a wish, right?
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. And wishes and dreams are really, really important. But it's really what we do. And so it's not necessarily what we know, it's what we do.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Wishes and dreams are fodder for the goals and plans to get there, right? For sure.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes.
I think we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about the physical, mental connection of our whole body and our whole mind, right? And CBT. So I know what it's called now, and
it's
that's
so
awesome.
successful for so many people. One of the reasons I really love it is because it's not dependent on me whether people get better or not, unless I don't give them the information very well. But it's dependent on what they do. And so I've seen over and over and over again people, and I don't ask people, I don't say, trust me. I don't say, some people say, I don't believe it's going to work, or I don't believe you. And I say, that's fine. You don't need to. I'm just asking you to do it. And you know what? If after a certain amount of time, you're not feeling any different, then you can stop. But 9 out of 10 times when people do it, Well, actually 10 out of 10 times when people do it, they feel better. I can never predict how quickly, but they do. And physical is where we start. Get yourself moving. First thing we start with get a schedule, get a routine, get an activity together. And then we work on the more complicated thought changing afterwards.
All right. I think we're gonna wrap it up.
I'll let you wrap.
Yeah. Have you got anything else you wanted to cover or mention or anything? I'm out of questions.
Yeah, I don't think so. For me, it's just really important if people are struggling to find someone who practices pure CBT, because some people will put pieces in and mix it up, but it's really one of those practices that when you follow the protocol from beginning to end, it really works. So I just encourage people, if they're struggling, get out, get moving, get yourself, find someone who can help you move through the process of learning how to think again. And remember, it doesn't have to be positive all the time. It can be neutral. So.
All right. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for being on People Talks. We'll put a link to your information in the closing credits, as well as in our social media links when we get going.
Okay, nice meeting you, Clay.